The champagne tasted like victory until Raven North discovered it was actually poison. There he stood in his penthouse, overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline, celebrating the biggest merger of his career, when a single photograph delivered to his phone would destroy everything he thought he knew about loyalty, love, and family. The image showed his wife of 8 years wrapped in his brother's arms outside a hotel in Miami, her wedding ring glinting in the afternoon sun as she pressed her lips to the mouth that had once promised to always have Raven's back. But what Raven discovered next would prove that betrayal runs deeper than infidelity, and revenge can be served colder than a New York winter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The merger celebration at Morrison & Associates had lasted until nearly midnight. Raven North loosened his tie as he stepped into the marble-floored lobby of his building, still riding the high of closing the Blackstone acquisition. 8 months of 18-hour days, countless flights between coasts, and negotiations that had pushed his marriage to its limits. But it was worth it. The commission alone would set his family up for life. He thought about surprising Elena with that trip to Tuscany she'd been dreaming about, maybe finally starting the family they'd been putting off for his career. The elevator hummed softly as it carried him to the 42nd floor. Raven pulled out his phone to check if Elena had left any messages. She'd been distant lately, claiming stress from her gallery opening, but tonight felt like a fresh start. The penthouse was dark when he entered, save for the city lights streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Elena wasn't home, which wasn't unusual. Her art world kept her out late at openings and networking events. Raven poured himself 2 fingers of 18-year-old Macallan and settled into his leather chair, savoring the burn and the view. His phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from colleagues, but one notification caught his attention. An unknown number had sent a single image with no text. Probably spam, he thought, but curiosity got the better of him. The world tilted sideways. The photograph was crystal clear, taken through what appeared to be a restaurant window. Elena sat across from a man whose profile was unmistakably familiar. Marcus North, Raven's younger brother. They weren't just talking. Elena's hand rested on top of Marcus's across the white tablecloth, her fingers intertwined with his in a gesture that spoke of intimacy, of secrets shared in whispered conversations. But it was the second photo that made Raven's blood turn to ice water. The same 2 people, this time standing beside a black Mercedes outside what looked like the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami. Elena wore the blue dress Raven had bought her for their anniversary last month. Marcus had his arm around her waist, pulling her close as they kissed with the passion of lovers, not the polite peck of family. The timestamp showed yesterday, Tuesday afternoon, the exact time Raven had been in his Manhattan office finalizing merger documents. Raven set down his glass with surgical precision, his hand remarkably steady despite the earthquake happening in his chest. He studied every pixel of those images, searching for some innocent explanation that didn't exist. The body language, the setting, the obvious comfort between them painted a picture that needed no interpretation. His phone rang. Marcus. Raven stared at the incoming call, watching his brother's name flash across the screen. On the 4th ring, he answered. "Hey, big brother." Marcus's voice carried that easy charm that had gotten him out of trouble since childhood. "Heard about the Blackstone deal. Figured you'd be celebrating tonight. Where are you calling from?" Raven kept his voice neutral, professional. "The office, unfortunately. Working late on the Henderson portfolio. You know how demanding clients can be." The lie rolled off Marcus's tongue like he'd been practicing. "Elena mentioned you've been putting in crazy hours. She's worried about you, man. Says you barely talk anymore." Raven closed his eyes. The casual mention of his wife, the manufactured concern, the way Marcus spoke about Elena like they were old friends catching up. How long had this been going on? How many conversations had they shared about him behind his back? "Marcus, when's the last time you were in Miami?" A pause. Just half a second too long. "Miami? Why would I be in Miami? I hate that place. Too humid, too many tourists, you know that." Another lie. Raven had the proof literally in his hands, but Marcus was doubling down with the confidence of someone who thought he was untouchable. It was the same arrogance he'd shown as a teenager when he'd crashed their father's car and convinced everyone it was a mechanical failure. The same smirk he'd worn when he'd taken credit for Raven's scholarship essay and gotten accepted to Stanford. "Just curious, Elena mentioned something about a business trip." "Nope, been here all week. Listen, why don't we grab dinner tomorrow, the three of us? Elena suggested this new place in Soho. Apparently they have the best ossobuco in the city." The three of us. The casual way Marcus included himself in their marriage plans made Raven's jaw clench. He wondered how many of these dinner suggestions had come from his wife. How many times they'd sat across from him planning their next rendezvous while he picked up the check. "Sounds great," Raven heard himself say. "I'll see you tomorrow." He ended the call and sat in the silence of his penthouse, surrounded by the trappings of success that suddenly felt hollow. The Picasso sketch on the wall, the handmade Italian furniture, the wine collection worth more than most people's annual salary. None of it mattered when the two people closest to him had been conducting a secret life behind his back. Raven walked to the window and pressed his palm against the cool glass. 42 stories below, the city pulsed with life. People hurrying home to families, couples walking hand in hand, everyone living honest lives, when his own had become a carefully constructed lie. The front door clicked open. Elena's heels echoed across the marble entryway. The same sound that used to make his heart skip when he was working late and heard her coming home. Tonight, it sounded like a countdown timer. "Raven, are you home?" Her voice carried that musical quality that had first attracted him at a gallery opening 9 years ago. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. She had been explaining the symbolism in a contemporary sculpture to a patron, her passion for art evident in every gesture. He'd fallen in love with her mind before her beauty, drawn to someone who saw meaning in abstract shapes and found poetry in painted canvas. "In the living room," he called back, slipping his phone into his pocket. Elena appeared in the doorway, still wearing the black cocktail dress from whatever event she'd actually attended. Her auburn hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the late hour. She looked exactly like the woman he'd married, except now he knew she was a stranger. "How did the merger meeting go?" She kissed his cheek, the same ritual they'd performed thousands of times. Her lips felt like ice against his skin. "Closed the deal. Blackstone is officially part of Morrison & Associates as of 6 p.m. today." "That's wonderful, darling. I'm so proud of you." She moved to the bar cart and poured herself a glass of wine. "Sorry I'm so late. The gallery reception ran longer than expected. You know how these artist types are when they get started talking about their work." Another lie, delivered with the same casual confidence as Marcus's denial about Miami. Raven wondered if they'd practiced their stories together, coordinating their alibis over pillow talk in some hotel room while he worked himself to exhaustion for their future. "Which gallery?" he asked, settling back into his chair. "The Meridian. They're showcasing emerging artists from the Pacific Northwest. Fascinating work, really. There was this one piece that reminded me of your grandmother's landscape paintings." Elena was an excellent liar. She had the details, the passion, the authentic enthusiasm that would fool anyone who wasn't holding photographic evidence of her deception. Raven found himself almost admiring the performance. "Sounds interesting. Maybe we could go together next time." "I'd love that." She sat on the arm of his chair, running her fingers through his hair the way she used to when they were dating. "We haven't spent enough time together lately. I miss you." The words hit like physical blows. She missed him while she was kissing his brother in Miami. She wanted to spend time with him while planning dinner dates with her lover. The sheer audacity of it took his breath away. "I miss you too," he said, and realized with surprise that it was true. He missed the woman he thought he'd married, the person who existed before he learned she was capable of this level of deception. Elena's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at it, and for just a moment her composure slipped. A flash of something crossed her face: guilt, panic, excitement, before the mask slid back into place. "Work email," she said, but she didn't pick up the phone. Raven could see the notification from where he sat. A text message. The contact name was just a heart emoji, but he didn't need to see the sender to know who was reaching out to his wife at midnight. "Elena," he said carefully, "do you ever think about what would happen if one of us betrayed the other?" She stiffened almost imperceptibly. "What do you mean?" "Just hypothetically. If one of us broke our vows, lied about something fundamental, how would we handle it?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring into her wine glass. When she looked up, her eyes were unreadable. "I think," she said slowly, "that we'd figure it out. We always do. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Forgiveness, trust, choosing each other even when it's hard." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like a confession wrapped in philosophy. She was telling him exactly what she expected when the truth finally came out. Forgiveness, understanding, the generous interpretation of her actions that would let her keep both her marriage and her affair. "You're right," Raven said. "Trust is everything." Elena smiled and kissed her forehead before heading to the bedroom. Raven remained in his chair, listening to her nightly routine through the open door. The sound of running water, drawers opening and closing, the familiar rhythm of a life he thought he knew. When she was finally asleep, Raven retrieved his laptop from his study. He needed to know more than what those photographs had revealed. If Marcus and Elena were capable of this level of deception, what else had they been hiding? He started with the obvious places: credit card statements, phone records, travel receipts. The digital breadcrumbs of a marriage he was only now beginning to investigate. What he found made his blood run cold. Elena's personal credit card showed charges from Miami going back 6 months. Not just the recent trip, but a pattern of weekend getaways that coincided perfectly with Raven's business travels. Hotels, restaurants, rental cars. A secret life funded by the joint account he'd been depositing his paychecks into for 8 years. But it was the legal documents buried in Elena's email that stopped his heart completely. Divorce papers, drafted 3 weeks ago by Patterson and Associates, one of the most aggressive family law firms in the city. The proposed settlement was breathtaking in its audacity. Elena was claiming half of everything, including his stake in Morrison and Associates, the penthouse, and the vacation home in the Hamptons. The ground cited irreconcilable differences and emotional neglect. The kicker was the alimony request: $40,000 a month for 10 years, based on her having become accustomed to a certain lifestyle during their marriage. The same lifestyle she was apparently planning to share with his brother once she'd taken half of everything Raven had worked to build. Raven printed the documents and sat staring at them in the blue glow of his computer screen. This wasn't just an affair. It was a systematic dismantling of his life, orchestrated by the 2 people he trusted most. Elena wasn't planning to ask for a divorce. She was planning to ambush him with one, taking everything she could while he was blindsided by betrayal. The timeline was becoming clear. The affair had started at least 6 months ago, probably longer. Elena had been planning her exit strategy while still playing the loving wife, gathering financial documents and building a case for maximum alimony. Marcus had been feeding her information about Raven's business dealings, helping her understand exactly how much money was at stake. Raven thought about all the times Marcus had asked casual questions about the firm's cases, about Raven's investment portfolio, about the real estate deals he was considering. He'd thought his brother was just showing interest in his career. Instead, Marcus had been conducting reconnaissance for his girlfriend's legal team. The merger celebration felt like a lifetime ago. Just hours earlier, Raven had been on top of the world, planning a future with a woman who was secretly planning to destroy him. The success he'd thought would secure their happiness had actually painted a target on his back. But as Raven sat in his study surrounded by evidence of their betrayal, something unexpected happened. The hurt and shock began crystallizing into something harder, sharper. Elena and Marcus thought they were dealing with the same trusting fool who'd never questioned a late night or a business trip. They had no idea they'd just declared war on someone who'd built his career on outmaneuvering opponents who underestimated him. Raven had spent 15 years learning how to take apart companies and rebuild them stronger. He'd negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions, turned failing businesses into industry leaders, and made himself indispensable to clients who demanded nothing less than total victory. Now he was going to turn those skills on the two people who thought they could take everything he'd built and walk away laughing. The first step was information. If Elena had been planning this for months, there were more secrets to uncover. Financial records, communications, evidence of exactly how long this conspiracy had been developing. Raven needed to understand the full scope of their betrayal before he could begin dismantling it. He opened a new browser window and began researching Patterson and Associates. Expensive, ruthless, and very good at what they did, but not good enough to hide digital footprints from someone who knew where to look. Raven had contacts in IT security, people who could trace email chains and recover deleted files for the right price. By dawn, Raven had compiled a dossier that would have impressed his corporate intelligence team. Elena's affair went back 8 months, starting during a girls' weekend in Las Vegas that had actually been a romantic getaway with Marcus. The divorce papers were just the beginning. Elena had also been consulting with a private investigator, trying to document Raven's work schedule to build a case for emotional abandonment. The cruel irony wasn't lost on him. While Raven had been working 16-hour days to provide for their future, Elena had been building evidence that those same work hours proved he was a neglectful husband who deserved to lose everything. Marcus's involvement went beyond just sleeping with his brother's wife. Phone records showed hundreds of calls between them, often late at night when Raven was traveling. Marcus had helped Elena open secret accounts, had introduced her to his financial advisor, and had even co-signed for a safety deposit box that Raven knew nothing about. But the most damning evidence was a series of text messages Raven's IT contact had recovered from Elena's deleted files. Messages between Elena and Marcus planning their celebration dinner for the night they planned to serve Raven with divorce papers. They'd chosen the same restaurant where Raven had proposed 8 years earlier. The symbolism was deliberate, cruel, and exactly the kind of psychological warfare that would have destroyed the man Raven used to be. But that man had died sometime between midnight and dawn, replaced by someone who understood that loyalty was a weakness his enemies would exploit until he stopped giving them the opportunity. Raven closed his laptop and walked to the bedroom where Elena still slept peacefully, her face serene in the morning light filtering through silk curtains. She looked like an angel, innocent and beautiful, and completely unaware that her perfectly planned betrayal was about to become the biggest mistake of her life. But first, Raven needed to understand exactly how deep this conspiracy went. Because if Elena and Marcus had taught him anything, it was that the betrayal you can see is never the whole story. The investigation began with a single phone call to David Chen, a digital forensics specialist who'd helped Raven expose embezzlement in 3 different corporate acquisitions. Chen operated from a nondescript office in Chinatown, the kind of place that looked like an accountant's firm from the outside, but housed some of the most sophisticated data recovery equipment on the East Coast. Raven had learned years ago that in business, information was the ultimate currency, and Chen was one of the few people who could extract it from any digital device or deleted file. When Raven arrived at Chen's office the next morning, he carried a briefcase containing Elena's laptop, which she'd conveniently left unlocked while showering. Chen took one look at Raven's expression and didn't ask unnecessary questions. Professional discretion was part of what made him worth his substantial fees. "How deep do you want me to go?" Chen asked, connecting Elena's laptop to his analysis equipment. "Everything," Raven replied. "Email histories, deleted files, browser cache, messaging apps, cloud storage, social media. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." Chen nodded and got to work.
While sophisticated algorithms combed through years of digital data, Raven turned his attention to the second phase of his investigation. If Elena and Marcus thought they were smart enough to orchestrate this betrayal, he needed to understand just how extensive their network was. Affairs rarely happen in isolation, especially ones this calculated. Raven's first stop was his own office at Morrison & Associates. The 43rd floor housed the executive suites, a collection of glass-walled offices that overlooked Manhattan's financial district. Raven's corner office commanded views of both the Hudson River and Central Park, a privilege that came with being the firm's youngest senior partner and their most successful dealmaker. He settled behind his mahogany desk and pulled up Marcus's employee file. His brother worked for Sterling Investment Group, a mid-tier firm that specialized in wealth management for high-net-worth individuals. Marcus had landed the job 3 years ago, largely thanks to a recommendation letter Raven had written highlighting his brother's integrity and dedication to client service. The irony tasted like ash in his mouth. Raven began cross-referencing Marcus's client list with Elena's social calendar. What he found painted a picture of manipulation that went far beyond a simple affair. Several of Elena's gallery contacts were also Marcus's clients, creating a web of financial relationships that gave Marcus access to insider information about art market trends. Elena had been using her position in the gallery world to feed Marcus investment opportunities, which he then presented to his clients as his own research. But it went deeper. Phone records showed that Marcus had been in contact with several of Raven's business associates, including James Morrison, the founding partner of Raven's firm. The conversations had been brief, always during business hours, and officially logged as courtesy calls between family members. But the timing was suspicious. Many of these calls had occurred just before major deal announcements, suggesting Marcus was fishing for information he could use in his own investment strategies. Raven leaned back in his leather chair, staring out at the city where millions of people went about their honest lives while his own family had been treating him like a mark in an elaborate con game. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking. This wasn't just about Elena wanting a divorce or Marcus wanting Raven's wife. This was about systematically exploiting every aspect of Raven's success for their own financial gain. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Lunch at home today? I'm making your favorite carbonara." The casual domestic domesticity, the pretense of loving normalcy, made Raven's jaw clench. She was probably planning to pump him for information about the Blackstone merger while serving him pasta and playing the devoted wife. He typed back, "Sounds perfect. See you at 1." But first, he needed to make a different kind of lunch appointment. Sarah Martinez had been Raven's law school study partner before becoming one of Manhattan's most feared litigation attorneys. She specialized in high-stakes divorce cases and corporate fraud, exactly the combination of expertise Raven was going to need. They met at an upscale steakhouse in Midtown, the kind of place where million-dollar deals were discussed over dry-aged beef and expensive wine. Sarah listened without interruption as Raven laid out the evidence he'd gathered.
Her expression remained professionally neutral, but he caught the flash of anger in her eyes when he described the divorce papers Elena had prepared in secret. "She's using the Patterson playbook," Sarah said when Raven finished. "File first, ask questions later, go for maximum damage while the husband is still reeling from shock. It's effective because most men in your position make emotional decisions that hurt them legally." "What would you do?" Raven asked. Sarah smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "I'd burn their world down, but I'd do it legally and systematically. The affair gives us leverage, but the financial conspiracy is what's going to destroy them. If Marcus has been using insider information from your conversations to benefit his clients, that's securities fraud. If Elena has been coordinating with him to hide assets or manipulate the divorce settlement, that's conspiracy to commit fraud." She pulled out a legal pad and began sketching a strategy that was both elegant and ruthless. First, they would file for an injunction to freeze all of Elena and Marcus's assets pending investigation of their financial activities. Second, they would refer the securities fraud evidence to the SEC and the FBI's white-collar crime division. Third, they would file a civil lawsuit seeking damages for the conspiracy and requesting full disclosure of all hidden assets. The beauty of this approach, Sarah explained, is that once federal investigators get involved, Elena's divorce becomes the least of her problems. She'll be fighting criminal charges and civil forfeiture instead of planning how to spend your alimony payments. Raven felt something cold and satisfied settle in his chest. Elena and Marcus had planned their betrayal like a military campaign, but they'd made one critical error. They'd assumed Raven would react emotionally, that he'd be so devastated by the personal betrayal that he wouldn't think strategically about the legal and financial implications. They were about to learn that assuming was dangerous when dealing with someone who'd built his career on turning other people's mistakes into his advantages. After lunch, Raven returned to Chen's office to review the digital forensics results. What Chen had found exceeded even Raven's darkest suspicions. Elena's laptop contained thousands of photos, videos, and documents that painted a picture of a double life so extensive it was almost impressive in its scope. The affair with Marcus had begun 14 months ago, not 8 as Raven had initially calculated. It had started during Raven's business trip to Tokyo when Elena was supposed to be attending a gallery conference in Miami. Instead, she'd met Marcus for what their text messages described as a long overdue reunion. The language suggested this wasn't the beginning of their relationship, but rather a rekindling of something that had existed before. Chen pulled up a series of photos that made Raven's blood pressure spike. Elena and Marcus at what appeared to be a college reunion, both of them young and clearly intimate. The metadata showed the photos had been taken 15 years ago, just 2 years before Raven met Elena at that gallery opening. They dated in college, Chen said quietly. Based on these social media archives, they were together for almost 3 years before breaking up senior year. Raven stared at the screen, processing the implications. Elena had never mentioned dating Marcus. When Raven had introduced them at a family barbecue 8 years ago, they'd acted like virtual strangers, making polite small talk and showing no signs of shared history. The performance had been flawless, suggesting they'd planned the deception from the very beginning. "There's more," Chen continued, pulling up financial records. "Your wife has been moving money to offshore accounts for the past 6 months. Small amounts, never enough to trigger banking alerts, but it adds up to almost $200,000. The offshore accounts were registered in the Cayman Islands under a shell corporation called Meridian Holdings. Elena had been systematically siphoning money from their joint accounts, building a war chest that would fund her new life with Marcus while leaving Raven to discover the theft only after she'd vanished with his brother. But the most damaging evidence was a series of audio recordings Chen had recovered from Elena's cloud storage. Conversations between Elena and Marcus recorded on her phone during their Miami trips. They spoke with the casual intimacy of longtime lovers, but the content of their discussions was pure calculation. "He's so focused on work, he never pays attention to the money," Elena's voice said in one recording. "I could probably take twice what we're planning and he wouldn't notice until the divorce papers hit." Marcus's response was equally cold. "The key is making him think the divorce is about emotional stuff. If he's focused on feeling betrayed about the affair, he won't dig into the financial side until it's too late." Another recording captured them discussing Raven's business relationships, with Elena providing details about his upcoming deals and Marcus explaining how that information could be monetized through his investment clients. They spoke about Raven like he was a resource to be exploited, not a person they supposedly loved. The final recording was the most damning. Elena and Marcus discussing the timeline for serving divorce papers, coordinated with Marcus's plan to leave Sterling Investment Group and start his own firm using the money they'd stolen from Raven. "Once the divorce is final and we have our settlement, we can disappear for a while," Marcus said. "I'm thinking Switzerland, maybe the Cayman Islands, somewhere with good banking privacy laws and no extradition treaties." Elena laughed, a sound that had once made Raven's heart skip but now made his stomach turn. "By the time he figures out how much we actually took, we'll be untouchable." Raven listened to his wife and brother plan his destruction with the detached professionalism of people planning a business acquisition.
There was no passion, no guilt, no acknowledgement that they were dismantling the life of someone who trusted them completely. They were predators who'd identified a mark and were systematically stripping him of everything he'd worked to build. When the recordings ended, Raven sat in silence for several minutes. Chen busied himself organizing files, giving his client space to process what he'd learned. Finally, Raven spoke. "I need copies of everything, multiple backups, and I need you to prepare a report that would hold up in federal court." Chen nodded. "What's your timeline?" "Tonight," Raven said. "I'm having dinner with them tonight, and I want them to know exactly what I found before they have a chance to destroy more evidence." Raven spent the rest of the afternoon in his office, making phone calls and sending carefully worded emails. By 5 p.m., he'd set in motion a series of events that would systematically dismantle the life Elena and Marcus thought they were building. Federal investigators would begin reviewing Marcus's trading records first thing Monday morning. Elena's offshore accounts would be frozen by Tuesday, and both of them would be served with subpoenas by Wednesday. But first, Raven was going to give them the opportunity to confess. Not because he believed in mercy, but because he wanted to see their faces when they realized their perfect plan had been discovered by the man they'd assumed was too trusting to fight back. The dinner was scheduled for 7 p.m. at Chez Laurent, the same restaurant where Raven had proposed to Elena 8 years earlier. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. They'd chosen the site of his happiest memory as the place to deliver his destruction. Tonight, he was going to turn their psychological warfare back on them. Raven arrived early and requested a private dining room, the same one where he'd gotten down on one knee and promised Elena a lifetime of love and loyalty. The maitre d' remembered him and made a point of mentioning how romantic the evening had been all those years ago. If only he knew what kind of reunion he was facilitating tonight. Elena arrived first, looking stunning in a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She'd always had impeccable taste, though Raven now realized much of it had been funded by money she'd stolen from their joint accounts. She kissed his cheek and settled into her chair with the grace of someone who believed she was completely in control of the evening's agenda. Marcus arrived 10 minutes later, all swagger and expensive cologne. He clasped Raven's shoulder like they were old friends meeting for a casual dinner, instead of co-conspirators about to be exposed. His suit was new, Italian, the kind of purchase that suggested someone expecting a significant windfall in the near future. "To the Blackstone merger," Marcus said, raising his wine glass. "My brother, the deal-making machine."
Raven raised his own glass and smiled. "To family loyalty." Elena and Marcus exchanged a glance so brief that someone who wasn't watching for it might have missed it entirely. But Raven caught it, the tiny communication that confirmed they were operating as a team against him. They ordered dinner and made small talk about work, mutual friends, Elena's upcoming gallery opening. The conversation was perfectly normal on the surface, but Raven could hear the undercurrents now that he knew what to listen for. Elena's questions about his travel schedule weren't casual interest. Marcus's comments about market trends weren't brotherly advice. They were gathering intelligence for their final assault on his assets. Halfway through the main course, Raven decided it was time to end the charade. "I have something I want to share with both of you," he said, reaching into his briefcase. "I've been doing some research lately, and I've discovered some fascinating information about offshore banking and securities fraud." He placed a manila envelope on the table between them. Elena's face went pale. Marcus's fork stopped midway to his mouth. "Inside this envelope, you'll find detailed financial records, audio recordings, and photographic evidence of a conspiracy to defraud me of approximately $2 million in assets." Raven's voice was calm, conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. "You'll also find documentation of securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering activities spanning the past 14 months. Elena's hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. Marcus set down his fork and leaned back in his chair, his expression cycling through shock, anger, and calculation. "Raven, I don't know what you think you found, but—" Elena began. I found recordings of you planning my destruction, Raven interrupted. I found evidence of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I found proof that you've been stealing from our joint accounts for months while pretending to be my loving wife. And I found evidence that Marcus has been using insider information from our conversations to commit securities fraud. Marcus tried a different approach. Look, big brother, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, Raven said, was mine. I misunderstood the kind of people I was dealing with. I thought I was married to someone with integrity. I thought I had a brother who valued family loyalty. Instead, I was living with two parasites who saw me as nothing more than a source of funding for their shared delusions. Elena's composure finally cracked. You don't understand what it's been like being married to someone who cares more about work than his own wife. Do you know how lonely I've been? How ignored? Lonely enough to steal $200,000 from our joint accounts? Raven asked. Ignored enough to plan my financial destruction while I was working to secure our future? Marcus leaned forward, his charm replaced by something uglier. You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you? The successful one, the responsible one, the golden boy who can do no wrong. Well, maybe it's time someone knocked you down a few pegs. Raven smiled, and both Elena and Marcus shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. They were beginning to realize that the man sitting across from them wasn't the same person they'd been manipulating for over a year. You're absolutely right, Marcus. I did think I was better than you. I thought I was more honest, more loyal, more trustworthy. And you know what? I was right. Raven stood up, leaving the envelope on the table. Federal investigators will begin reviewing your trading records Monday morning. Elena's offshore accounts have already been frozen, and both of you will be served with criminal subpoenas by Wednesday. Elena gasped. Marcus's face went red. You can't prove anything. I can prove everything, Raven said. Audio recordings, financial transactions, deleted emails, travel records, phone logs. I have a paper trail that documents your entire conspiracy from beginning to end. And I have something else you forgot to consider. He paused, enjoying the fear in their eyes. I have resources you can't match, connections you can't buy, and a very long memory. You thought you were stealing from someone who wouldn't fight back. Instead, you just declared war on someone who spent 15 years learning how to destroy people who underestimate him. Raven dropped a business card on the table. That's my attorney's contact information. You'll be hearing from her soon. I'd suggest you find good lawyers of your own because you're going to need them. As he walked toward the exit, Elena called out his name. He turned back to see her standing beside the table, tears streaming down her face, looking every bit the remorseful wife seeking forgiveness. Raven, please, we can fix this. We can start over. I know I made mistakes, but I still love you. For a moment, Raven felt an echo of the old feelings, the love and trust that had once made him vulnerable to her manipulation. Then he remembered the recordings, her voice laughing as she planned his destruction, and the feeling passed. Elena, he said quietly, you're about to learn the difference between love and possession. You never loved me. You loved what I could provide. And now you're going to discover what life looks like without that security. Outside the restaurant, Manhattan pulsed with its usual energy. People hurried past on sidewalks, cars honked in traffic. The city continued its relentless rhythm. But for Raven, everything had changed. He was no longer the trusting husband and loyal brother who'd walked into that restaurant. He was someone harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous to people who mistook kindness for weakness. The next phase of his plan would require patience, precision, and a willingness to watch two people he'd once loved destroy themselves through their own greed and stupidity. Elena and Marcus had taught him that loyalty was a luxury he could no longer afford. Now they were going to learn what happened when someone with unlimited resources and nothing left to lose decided to seek justice. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen.
If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.